Look at that. Look at that. 3 seconds. 3 seconds left in the 4:15 hour, and we got in on time. I was trying to go back through and watch the whole first half, and because I was at the game. And sometimes you see a lot more on television. Plus, you get the charming commentary of Andy Kalu and John Harris. Thanks to BetUS for sponsoring this video. My head is spinning, man, after that game because I don't know what the thumbnail says. I think it says I was wrong on it, which because I was. What did I tell all of you guys when the Texans signed Cam Akers? Hey, look, it's a nice experiment. They'll see he's coming off of his second Achilles. He couldn't possibly show up and trucked Jason Taylor on the sideline. Not the original Jason Taylor, but a Jason Taylor nonetheless. He pulled off 3.5 spin moves on one run. He looked great out of the backfield as a receiver. That was, I mean, look, he's looked good before, but I think the biggest thing today was on some of those runs. We saw him, cut back against the grain when the blocking wasn't good. Check. We saw him bulldoze a dude on the sideline. Check. I feel like the Achilles tendons have fully recovered. 2 Achilles tendons. He's torn 2 Achilles tendons. That's right, balloons. I don't know how that happens. I can't ever make it happen on command. It's only when I'm speaking genuinely with excitement about Cam Akers. My God. Oh, boy. I'll tell you what. The running back situation, I'm both excited and frustrated about it because, DeMeco the other day said that he felt like Damien hadn't gotten good blocking, and that was the problem, why he's averaging 1 yard per carry. I feel it's more than that because the old Damien Pierce would have broken at least one of those tackles on one of those plays when there was bad blocking. That's neither here nor there right now. I still kind of wonder if maybe he was held out today because maybe they've gotten some trade conversations going or something. I don't know. But if Cam Akers doesn't make this team, I'm gonna have some serious questions and reservations about how they're judging the running back room. And when you add to that the fact that, I mean, British Brooks got some time as a fullback. I almost called him an H-back because that's what you do when you call somebody that is playing fullback but that isn't a fullback, but played better. British Brooks, for whatever it's worth, in one preseason game, I thought he looked better as a blocker at fullback than Troy Hairston is. Troy Hairston, man, he had a touchdown today, but he had a rough day. He had, is it 4 holding? Did you guys see on the TV copy? Was one of those holding calls wrong? Because he had 4 holding penalties called when we were up in the press box, and I saw at least 3 of them. I know one of them was kind of sketchy, and he had some missed blocks, and he's had a couple missed blocks, like one really egregious one a couple weeks ago. So I think that right now the best option at fullback might be British Brooks until Andrew Beck gets back and healthy. But when it comes to the running back position, I like Jawar Jordan. I'll just go through the box score. I'll tell you what they all did today. Because Cam Akers averaged 6.3 yards per carry. Also looked good as a receiver out of the backfield. I'm sorry. Cam Akers, 3 receptions for 19 yards. He had that many receptions that I confused that. He had 7 carries for 53 yards, 7.6 yards per attempt. Steven Sims had 1 rush for 38 yards. Obviously, but he's flashed as well. We'll get to the wide receivers because, man, my head's been flipped upside down on that too. J.J. Taylor, 7 carries for 30 yards. British Brooks, 5 carries for 25 yards, and he also had 1 catch for 6 yards where he trucked somebody. Jawar Jordan, 4 carries for 12 yards. If I had to give my top 3 right now at running back, it's going to be Joe Mixon, it's going to be Cam Akers, and then I guess it's Damien. I mean, I'd rather see British Brooks right now or Jawar Jordan I'm torn. I'm really, really torn. Some of this comes down to what Andrew Beck's health is like. If Andrew Beck's not healthy and ready to go, I think that keeping British Brooks on as a running back / fullback might be the best option. But Agumbawale is out there too as a special teamer. So that's the battle at running back. I don't know if it includes any kind of move of Damien Pierce or not. I've just seen more juice out of all of those guys. And I'll be the first one to make some excuses for Damien, but I've just seen no juice out of him for now. It's an entire season in one preseason game, but whatever. But talking about this game here, the wide receivers, Xavier Hutchinson, 4 receptions for 34 yards. And then John Mechie had 2 receptions for 21 yards. Jimmy Johnson, the third, Quintez Cephas, those guys had more receptions or more yardage than John Mechie. But I'm thinking right now that we've kind of made this an either or with Xavier Hutchinson or John Mechie. I'm looking realistically at the way the wide receivers are composed, and that you've got your 3 A-plus guys at the top. And I almost look at them as age, even though they're very, very young, or at least Tank Dell is very young. I don't know if I think John Mechie's shown enough upside. He had a little stop and go where he put the brakes on like Maverick and Top Gun today, doing his own little imitation of Nico Collins from last week. I think they both make the team. And then it becomes a debate about, all right, the experience of Robert Woods, the big playability of Noah Brown. It gets really, really dicey after that. I really like Brooks. Damien might be the worst running back on the roster. I had a conversation with somebody. Damien just needs a little more time. That's the problem, though, John. I don't know how much time. Like, that's what they said last year. You know, there was a point early in the season last year where I said, I think Devin Singletary is going to be the main back on this team. And it really took Damien getting injured before the Texans realized that. I asked DeMeco in the press conference last week, what was the obstacle holding Damien Pierce back right now? And DeMeco said that he just needs better blocking, that he hasn't had good blocking when he's run. And that is true. The blocking hasn't been pristine or ideal. I thought there were opportunities where Cam Akers or somebody else would have gotten positive yardage out of those plays. The thing that I worry about is that because Damien Pierce is such an eminently likable dude in terms of, and I don't mean likable like, hey, he's a swell fella. Like, he's the kind of kid that you want on your football team, that I'm worried that maybe Caserio and DeMeco have a blind spot for him, to the point where you're soaking up a roster spot, waiting for something to happen that hasn't happened in over a year now. And I do think he looks better in practice. I wasn't lying to you guys when I thought he looked better in practice. But the thing that concerned me, and Titus Howard said the same thing that DeMeco did, which was, if you watch Damien in practice, when he's got more chances and the blocking is good in certain instances, he looks really good. The problem with that is that you're not tackling in practice. And Damien Pierce's greatest force as a running back was his ability to break tackles. I think, like many of you have said it along the way, and I suspect it all offseason. Now I really believe it. I think he needs to be back to his rookie year playing weight. So we'll see. Okay, quarterbacks. Tim Boyle made some great plays today. He did, but I think that Davis Mills might have had the best day at quarterback by not playing at all. I feel like with Case, we've seen that physically he's not the same guy. He was really off the mark a bunch of times today. I mean, I feared for Xavier Hutchinson's safety and internal organs at times, but I think he still has value as a veteran quarterback, that A, can come in a pinch, and B, can be a good resource for your other quarterbacks, for Davis Mills, for the wide receivers. I talked about this with Matt Schaub last week. Sean Pendergast and I did. And Matt talked about what he was his last couple of years in Atlanta, where he's backing up Matt Ryan. Like, Matt Ryan doesn't need his help as much as maybe the other young quarterbacks or the receivers or whomever else. They can talk to a veteran QB. And he's a resource in that way. Do you keep a third roster spot open for a quarterback? That's where it gets a little bit dicey, because I think for the same reasons that you like having Case around as a veteran guy that knows the offense, and if you needed him in an emergency, you like having him. Typically, you put that guy on the practice squad, but then that leaves him open. He's basically a free agent when he's on the practice squad. He can be the third string emergency quarterback on game days. They give you an extra game day roster spot for that. But would you end up possibly having him plucked away or something. I don't know if you're worried about that. I think Case likes being in Houston, not just with the Texans, but in the city of Houston. I think he kind of seems to be really enjoying his role on this team. So they might be able to work something out. A little wink, wink. Like, hey, just be sure you let us know, and we'll give us a chance to match. With Tim Boyle, I think if you're going to keep a third spot. If you're going to keep a third quarterback, I'd like it to either be a really young guy that's got upside or a guy like Case. And I don't know if Tim Boyle has done enough for me to say like, oh yeah, he's definitely that guy that's just, he could be a starting quarterback someday. So I'm just not so positive about that. Bubba Homeschool predicts 20-0 after that third preseason game. Yes, you gotta take some positives out of that. Let's see. This is going to look like an amazing season. Why is Damien Pierce not playing today? So we just discussed that, but I'm sure you're here for that. Yeah, I like. Do they feel he's locked in as the number 2? That's my concern. I defer to DeMeco and Casario's judgment in a lot of regards, but sometimes even the most brilliant of people sometimes have blind spots, and that's what I fear that it might be a blind spot. I don't know that it is, but I don't want to waste carries the way they did last year trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, or to fit a Damien-sized peg into a small hole in the offensive line, because he didn't do much with the small holes in the offensive line, or even a big hole. Sometimes a Damien-sized peg wasn't fitting in. So I just don't know. The other positions. So today, based on guys that got heavy usage in the first half, especially. And that was, Cam Akers was out there in the second half still. I felt like the running backs might still be one of the positions that was most up for competition. And that these guys, I think that Caserio really wanted to use this game maybe for the running backs to really tell and get a feel for things. Get British Brooks some receptions. Let's see how all these guys can do as receivers. We know that Jawar Jordan, I really like his potential as a receiver. I think maybe he's a guy you think you can stash on the practice squad. He's undersized, so you haven't really gotten a good feel for just how well he'll play against starters, but there's definitely something there that I like. I think he ends up being a practice squad guy. The guys that flashed in the first half defensively or throughout the game. So I've only rewatched the first half of the TV copy. Marcus Harris, I was kind of surprised to see he only had 2 tackles on the stat sheet because he's in the backfield so much. I've seen him do a better job of holding up the double teams as an undersized guy. I think they like Marcus Harris. I think Marcus Harris he's going to be fighting for, like, if you keep 9 or 10 defensive linemen, we would look at the ends, Will Anderson, Derek Barnett, I think for sure, Danielle Hunter for sure. And then it gets really interesting at defensive end. I'd be surprised if Jerry Hughes doesn't make the team. So if that leaves you one more defensive end, I mean, you look at Malik Fisher, who made some good plays today, Ali Gay, who's played a bunch in the preseason and I think done a good job. So I think it's a battle between like Ali Gay, Malik Fisher, Solomon Byrd, Feldarius Payne, I think is probably going to end up being more of a defensive tackle than a defensive end. So with playing time, I think it ends up being Ali Gay. A defensive tackle, right now, the way I'm looking at it, I think Mario Edwards, and we'll leave DeMeco Autry out of all of this. That becomes a decision later on. Mario Edwards and Foley Fatukasi for sure on the team. Khalil Davis and Kurt Heinisch, those guys seem like they kind of replicate each other. They're bigger guys that aren't the greatest athletes, but they do exactly what the coach wants them to do. So they're solid and steady versus Tim Settle and McTelvin Agim. I mean, Khalil Davis is on the team no matter what. Marcus Harris flashes a lot. I think it might be between Kurt Heinisch, Tim Settle, and McTelvin Agim right there. Linebacker is going to be very heavily based on special teams. I think Jamal Hill's got a lot of upside, but he's very raw right now, and I don't know how much he contributes on special teams. So he's going to be fighting. I think maybe it was like Delshon Phillips, who's a very good special teams player, but is in some respects almost like Jamal Hill. He doesn't look like a really naturally fluid linebacker just yet, and they haven't used him there. And then defensive backs, without going into the numbers, I don't want to bore you guys with just nothing but a litany of names here. Lonnie, how are we feeling about Lonnie Johnson? Because Lonnie shows up, and when he shows up in a bad mood. I mean, it's pretty routine that he's. I mean, he's been involved in some big collisions. He's a big dude with lots of range and athleticism, and he's much matured from what he was the first time he was here. So I don't. I'm not going to be surprised if he makes the team, but you're also looking at, in that case, he's going against MJ Stewart and Eric Murray. Does Lonnie Johnson become the fifth guy out of Brandon Hill? Okay. Oh, and you got Kalen Bullock there too. So I think Lonnie, I think MJ Stewart, who's been here for a couple of years and they like what he does versus maybe potentially, even though it's weird to say the upside of Lonnie Johnson because he got drafted in 2019. And yet I feel like he might have only reached full maturity, like as the complete and total package in the last couple of years, because he's just a physical freak. But okay, cornerback is the one that I'm intrigued by. These two guys, Dez King and Miles Bryant, because they both showed up today. Dez King, unfortunately, showed up with a muffed punt, and I've liked him as a punt returner. But I think you need a nickel corner who's an actual nickel cornerback, because Jalen Pitre is. This is why I call him a nickel linebacker, because he's more of a hybrid safety / linebacker than he is a safety / cornerback. So when you need a genuine slot corner to go in there and cover really good wide receivers, or it's going to be man heavy on a given day, I think you need that. That guy's going to be pretty important, and that it's probably going to be either Miles Bryant or Dez King. I think right now, Miles. I think because he's shown up as much as he has, and I think that they probably feel maybe more not a huge amount of upside, but athleticism and everything else like that. I feel like it might be him, but that's I think that's a battle right there. I'd be surprised if both those guys do it. King makes more plays even last year. Do you mean more plays than Miles Bryant or not? I don't know please clarify, Joe Lee. Please clarify. I'm not being passive aggressive. I just didn't understand the question or statement. I think the starters are elite this year, but the team needs real depth at every position in the secondary. Ideally, we wouldn't have rookies starting. I think it's a good point in general. I do think that they're very impressed with Lassiter. And I thought they brought in CJ Henderson and Jeff Okudah as guys that, as CJ Henderson specifically, as a guy that I think that they felt like, okay, if we have to, we can play with CJ Henderson, that we can, maybe be limited a little bit in what we do, or not task him in man coverage or whatever they might have been thinking with that. And maybe they would have gone out and looked elsewhere. I think with Lassiter from the beginning, they were really impressed with his maturity, his football IQ, all those kinds of things. And he's very polished by rookie standards. They coached the hell out of that kid at Georgia. I think some of these guys from Georgia, it actually ends up being to their detriment in terms of where they get drafted. You look at the guys, the two guys up in Philadelphia that came from that same Georgia defense. I think sometimes they're so well coached in college that some of those guys kind of tap out and they're playing at their maximum. And so when they get to the NFL, you realize like, oh gosh, I don't know if this guy was quite who we thought he was. With Lassiter, I think he's very, very polished, but he has the athleticism to play. The thing I like most about Lassiter is it feels exactly like the kind of move that the Ravens typically do, which is they get a guy that doesn't have great testing numbers, like Kyle Hamilton, bad 40 time. And they say, well, yeah, but you know what he does really well? He plays football really well. Can we maybe take a football player that doesn't have a great 40? Sure. Kyle Hamilton's a whole funny story too, because when you watch it, the way he actually ran his 40, some guys they're really bad track athletes. Kyle Hamilton ran like an extra yard or two on his 40 because he was like swerving in the lane as he was going. Some guys spend more time working on their combine stuff than they do working on football. I'll take the football players, damn it. Let's see. What was the clarification that I had asked for? King is freaking awesome. Yeah, I know. I really like King. But they cut him last year in training camp. With King, okay, Here's the thing with King muffing the punt today. There's always been something a little odd with Dez King and in his career, including with the Texans, but before, where he's not a bad dude whatsoever. I think he's really I think people really like him. I think he plays his ass off, but he has these odd little episodes where he has a team imposed suspension or he's left home off of a road trip or what have you. And I have no idea other than that for whatever reason or why those little team imposed things happen. I think there's perhaps a lack of dependability or something. Like those are usually those like of team imposed sanctions are for things like missing meetings or whatever else. So that's the conundrum of Dez King, and I don't know what to make of it other than that. Let's see. I want to see. Okay, as someone who's laid eyes on him, what is your impression of Kamari Lassiter? Is he's as good we're hearing? Yes, I think so. And I was skeptical at first. I think the first couple of days of training camp, there were some times, especially like when he had outside leverage on a play where, so he's got outside leverage and the wide receiver he's covering runs a post or a skinny post or something. And it didn't look like he had catch-up speed, but at the same time, I think some of the safeties were screwing up a lot the first few days of practice. So there's going to be separation when you've got outside leverage and a guy takes off across the field. That's where, and you've got you've had it drilled into your head, 4.640, 4.640. And I wondered then, like, honestly, from watching from the first day of camp until now, he looks like a professional cornerback. Like he is dialed in. He's got a really good feel for when to look for the ball. We're like reading the receiver's eyes, when to get his hand in between the receiver's hands when the ball's about to arrive. He doesn't have the ball skills of a Derek Stingley in terms of actually catching the ball. But when it comes to just to breaking up passes, and I think his stats in college reflected that. He didn't have a boatload of interceptions, but he had a boatload of PBUs. You guys can fact check me on that. But that's like that meets the eyeball test. So when you think about like in your mind's eye, when you think of like a priori cornerback in the NFL, like just kind of down in his crouch and never out over his feet or anything and reacting to the movements and anticipating the movements of the wide receiver. I've been very impressed with him. And you're right. We didn't get to see much of him in the Giants game because Daniel Jones, for God knows what reason, hadn't just wanted to throw at Derek Stingley that day. I felt like he was trying. It was suicide by Stingley. That's what he was doing. I don't think he's long for this league. He just wants out. He wants to collect his guaranteed money and get the hell out. So he said, I'm just going to throw the ball up to Derek Stingley and see what happens. That's my voice's version of his eyes. I didn't want to be mean. DeMeco has a real problem sifting through the SEC players and the rest of the acquisition. I don't know what that means either. I was sifting through. Like, do you mean just like sifting through some of the players right now and making these decisions? I don't know, or is that sarcasm? I suspect some of you have been drinking. Yes, Evan. Yes, I think that's it. I think that's a little bit of it. Let's see. It's the NFL. There's no room for an error, unfortunately. Well, I mean, there are okay. I mean, there's lots of errors. So I don't. If you're talking about Dez King's muffing, you're punished. You're punished for those errors. But everybody makes errors. Nobody has a perfect game. J.J. Watt, you go back and watch his best games ever. He had a few bad plays in there. Oh, the sun was in his face. Yeah. Did anybody talk about that afterwards? I feel like that's the kind of thing that nobody wants to make an excuse about, but might have been the case because the other one later in the game, that was right underneath God's shaft of sunlight. Whereas with Dez King, I could see where the trajectory of the ball maybe put his eyes into the light. It's not as bad in person as it looks on television, if you're wondering. I was kind of surprised last week when so many people asked players and DeMeco questions about like how much whether that open panel in the roofs affected things. TV is way worse. The cameras, for all their technology, they can't adjust to that old Texas stadium conundrum of having the bright sunlight go into the shade. But if you're looking up at it, perhaps I'm still keeping King over Bryant. Yeah, I know. Get the likes up, please. I'm going to do a reaction to the highlights because I know a lot of you guys like that. What happened to Keenum? Is he okay? I don't know, man. I was watching through the first half on double time speed and trying to take notes as much as possible. And let's see, I like Hutchinson more than John Mechie. Hutchinson is a bigger body and much stronger. It's this is where I was. If you want to follow this is the timeline of how I was this year during camp. I saw John Mechie, and John Mechie looked different physically, just looked faster, more explosive in one-on-ones and 7-on-7. He looked much crisper in his routes. And some of it, I think, was sometimes I was watching him go after Stephon Diggs, and I started in my mind making like a poor man's Steph Diggs comparison to John Mechie. Whereas Hutchinson is a guy that does not flash in practice as much athletically. He doesn't have necessarily that same suddenness, but when you watch Hutchinson over the course of the entire training camp, including just in 11-on-11 scrimmage stuff during camp and then in the preseason games, you can see he just glides through zone defenses and finds the spot, and he's exactly where quarterbacks need to be. I get the impression that the quarterbacks are very comfortable with Xavier Hutchinson. So all of the stuff that's not necessarily as flashy, he's very polished in all of it. And I think the dependability is there. With Mechie, I think it's a combination of the fact that it did finally click for him a couple weeks ago. And whereas in camp, in team scrimmage situations, he'd been making a lot of drops. Those first couple preseason games, it looked like he just wasn't clicking and getting it and integrating himself into the offense. We've seen these last couple of weeks, including in practice, that something flipped. So with Mechie, I think that it's impossible to evaluate with him if you're trying to think about what is his upside and what is his future. It's impossible to evaluate with him without also considering that he's coming off a 2-year ordeal of beating cancer. And that's a big deal. And I think that, he finished cancer treatment and then started getting ready for football right before training camp last year. And I think, he's been open about how he just physically didn't feel quite right last year. So, you can't evaluate him like he's a rookie, but I think you don't evaluate him like he's a third-year pro. That's where I think both Hutchinson and Mechie make the squad. If you tried to hope Mechie cleared waivers so you could put him on the practice squad, I don't think he's gonna, because I think a lot of other teams out there are gonna think like, okay, well, he did just have cancer, So I think they both make it, and then it becomes a battle for like, okay, the consistency and dependability of Robert Woods. Do you like the upside of some of those? I think they keep at least one veteran guy, whether it be Noah Brown or Robert Woods, but Noah Brown just hasn't been healthy. So there's an avenue by which I think Robert Woods and both Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie make the team. I'm probably forgetting somebody like really bona fide obvious. Skowronek, I thought, just by going by the eyeball test of flashing and making plays, I thought he was stronger earlier in camp. I think they like Steven Sims, obviously, as a returner. Somebody earlier said, hey, the kickoff return doesn't look like it's going to be a big deal, but punt return sure still is. That's one thing too. The kickoff return. So today, both coaches just said, enough of this. We're just going to boot it into the end zone and take it at the 30. I wonder if the NFL wanted the returns to be more a part of the game. They did increase the average drive start. These new returns, they ended up starting, I want to say it was the average of a 33-yard line. So that was effective. The problem is now coaches are going to say, well, look, if they're going to, on average, get out to the 33, we're just going to boot it into the end zone and we'll take our touchback at the 30. So I don't know what that means for what the NFL does, if they're going to keep the rule this year, if they're going to try to tweak it further, make the touchback even further out. I don't know. It's not as much of a mess as it is an annoyance. I know a lot of people are upset about it just because it's a huge change. Let's see. Brown is awesome too. Definitely keep him. I'm going to tell you honestly right now, Mechie like Diggs, Hutch like Nico, Tank is just Mighty Mouse. Rick, I know you're not drunk. Let's see. So if we go through the wide receivers, this is the trouble. This is the predicament you find yourself in. I can't find a guy here that if it was a normal season, like let's say you had two good starting wide receivers that you feel good about, and then a guy that's like, all right, whatever, but yeah, he's the slot. And then you got 2 or 3 spots to fill after that. It's not like I'd be distraught if Steven Sims or Quintez Cephas, who I find myself just turning my head and saying, "Oh wow, nice play by Quintez Cephas." Um, Ben Skoranek, especially because of special teams, and Johnny Johnson the third. But it's a very very competitive room this year, and I think that special teams probably ends up being the biggest difference. And Steven Sims brings something to the table as special teams there as a returner. Fullback, I mean, it was a rough day for Hairston. Yeah, he had a touchdown reception, which was awesome, but he also had 4 holding penalties. He had a couple missed blocks. The British Brooks looked good as a fullback on the plays that I noticed him. He brings a different element of bulldozing short yardage potential, perhaps, that not necessarily any of the other guys. I mean, Damien Pierce isn't that guy anymore. Like Damien Pierce, even though the blocking wasn't great, just couldn't get typically further than 1 yard past the line of scrimmage. He averaged 1 yard per carry in all those runs when they were playing tackle football. And I know he's looked good in I know he's looked good in practice, but they're not tackling you in practice. Uh, Andrew Beck, I just don't know what his health status is. So maybe he begins the year on PUP or something. Joe Mixon looked good on the sideline. I like that. I like seeing him. My other little conspiracy theory with Damien Pierce is that the Rams were here for a few days. The Rams are not an outside zone running team anymore. They've kind of transitioned into being more of a gap scheme, which is something that would theoretically suit Damien's skill set a little bit better. Personally, I think it's if he gets back up to his rookie playing weight, that's especially when he's really powerful, can break tackles. But I almost feel like there might be a baseball type trade coming out of these two teams being with each other. Not saying it's necessarily going to be Damien Pierce, but some of these wide receivers, perhaps some of these other players on the roster that the Rams got to look at, and vice versa for the Texans. If there's anybody that they were interested in saw, then something like that might be in the works. I'm going to show you one. I just want to watch this play from, and I'm going to be careful. I'm going to have to start and stop this because the live stream will be shut down if they feel like I'm playing copyrighted content. But just this is the guy, Cam Akers, and I believe British Brooks was in blocking on this play, right? Yeah, let's bring it right to the beginning. That's British Brooks right there at the right H-back, up back position. He comes back on a split zone, seals the backside. Cam Akers busts through, and then this is Jonathan Taylor. I don't know if it's Jonathan Taylor Jr. Of the Miami Dolphins fatherhood or something, but if he is, then Jonathan Taylor Sr. isn't owning him on that play. He's not claiming him. Hey, my son. That's Let me see if I can get the sound. Oh, I don't have the sound on that. John Harris was just so impressed. Did you see the impressed look on CJ's face? I feel like just from their interactions, this CJ really loves him some Cam Akers. So cuts upfield. The one thing that I really noticed about Cam Akers in this game was on some of the zone runs that ready? Ready? He didn't blindside him or anything. That's a good still shot there. Look at the guys behind him. Who's back there watching? Mm. Yeah, if Cam Akers doesn't make the team because he was out there playing a lot today, I feel like I think they wanted to see a little bit more Cam Akers. For a guy with his injury history to be out there taking as many snaps as he did, I think that they're having a genuine competition at running back. Who do you guys think would have won? Who won the running back competition today? Like right off the bat, I think Cam Akers, but Cam Akers had 7 carries for 53 yards, 7.6 yards per carry. British Brooks had 5 carries for 25 yards for 5 yards per carry. I'm looking for his long. His long was 15. So on his 4 other carries, he averaged 2.5 yards per carry. That sounds about right. But he also got a reception where he bulldozed some people too. And then Tim Boyle had 3 carries for -3 yards. Jawar Jordan and JJ Taylor, I think one of those guys will probably be on the practice squad, and they'll call it a day at that. DP will be fine. I'm seeing a lot of. Let's see. John Ryan says DP will be fine. John, you are loyal to previous Texans for sure, which is not a bad thing. Oh, the spin move too. I know I should have grabbed that. I'll see that on the highlights when I do the reaction for sure. I think. I've been curious, how did you end up covering the Texans? Did you enjoy playing for them so much that you became a fan? That's a good question. No, I mean, I remained a fan of them after I was gone. I spent 5 years kind of figuring out what the hell I wanted to do. This is what happens with a lot of football players. I was talking to Chris Clark about this today. We had Chris Clark, the former offensive tackle, on the pregame show. I might talk him into getting into doing some media. He's really smart, and he's too good looking for radio. He's trimmed down. He's one of these. He's one of these guys. These offensive linemen that have gone the Steve McKinney route. But a lot of guys have a plan. Like, I had a good, solid plan. I was all set up. I knew what I wanted to do when I was done playing football. Then you get a year into it, and you're like, oh, this I don't enjoy this at all. So then all of a sudden you're back to, like, I might as well have never had a plan anyway. And so I spent about like 5 years kind of trying out some different things. And John Granado called me to do some, just call in to give my thoughts on the game here and there back at, I think when he was at 1560 at the time. And I ended up enjoying it. And it was a way to like stay close to football. But as a football player, I played on some really good teams in Jacksonville. The first 5 years of my career were in Jacksonville. The second 5 were here. So we went to an AFC championship game, went to multiple playoffs, all that. But it was just a different feel for me there. I was kind of a young guy that was just coming into my own, where when I got here, I got kind of, for one, the whole expansion year experience where we could do no wrong was just really special. Like I always remind myself of that sometimes. I spent a whole year on a team that won 4 games, and the entire offseason people would come up to me and be like, "Oh, I can't believe you guys beat the Cowboys. That was the best thing ever." Like, people gushing about us after having 4 wins in a season. So because I was a veteran player, I just always felt like a little bit more ownership of the Texans. And then I also feel like, I still to this day feel like a sense of obligation to the team, because I was on those expansion teams, and yet we were making progress, and then everything fell apart. And then it was a few years before they actually became a real NFL team. So I always feel like I let the organization down somehow. So now I have a job in which I criticize the organization. It falls apart. The logic falls apart at the end. But other than that, it's I've just always felt like more of a commitment and a tie in some way. And that's about it. Like, when I was done playing, we lived in Jacksonville because we still had a house there for a couple years, and I never did any media there at all. I never felt necessarily like the same connection or just ownership in the team. Like, I feel I was practicing. I had a locker room in the Astrodome when NRG was still being built, aka FKA Reliant. Like, I had a locker room. I had a locker in the Astrodome, and it was every morning the strength and conditioning staff had to wipe down all of the weight room equipment, because we were working out in that old weight room with new equipment, but from all the rodeo dust that would sift in overnight in February. So, like that, I walked from the Astrodome to go take a cart to go to the new practice fields. I looked at the trees on Kirby and thought, man, that's cool. They're just planting them. I was like, I want to remember the size of those trees. Maybe someday I'll remember, like, oh, I'll be looking at those trees and they'll be like these majestic oaks that we see. And they're on their way to being majestic oaks. It's really, really cool. The coaching staff have their work cut out for the next few days and beyond. I saw Nick Caserio as I was going to the bathroom. Nick was leaving. I went in. Nick stuck his hand out to shake my hand, and I was kind of like, he seems like a hand washer. So I shook it, and and it was funny. It was like right between the first and second quarter or something. For some reason, I thought I would make small talk, and then I realized, like, oh yeah, you're general managing a football team right now. So I was like, get in there, yeah. And then I said, have a fun next few days, and he kind of did his Nick Caserio chuckle, like, because it's not fun. They got to make a lot of tough decisions, man. I think there will be some trades. I think that some of the decisions in the wide receivers room might end up being more about who gets the best trade offer. Like, do you want to really split hairs on who's the best fit for the roster or everything, compared to, like, all right, if some team wants to give up a 6th round pick but you like the other guy too that's still on the roster. Maybe it's as simple as that. I've only watched one episode of Hard Knocks off season, and it was with a GM who I don't know if he actually knows what he's doing or not. So I choose to think that Nick's operating differently than Joe Shane. The Seth Payne origin story. Thanks. Oh, what Fruction say? Function. Is it possible we have the most players claimed off waivers? We seem stacked. It is possible. I think that's one of the hard decisions they have to make right now. I was thinking about that today after Nick shook my hand with his, I'm sure, freshly washed hand. I had to wash my hands. So I was thinking about that part of it too. Like, you're part of the stress of this weekend is, I think some of the guys that you're afraid won't clear waivers, you're really delaying on, and you maybe cut them down to where other teams have gone out and found a receiver and they don't want to make another transaction. So you're looking at the waiver wire. The Texans are lower on the waiver wire this year than they have been in a few years. And you're kind of trying to gauge, all right, well, if we put this guy on waivers, maybe he clears, then we have him on the practice squad. But in the meantime, wow, I really like this other guy who just became available. And it gets dicey. It gets really, really dicey. This is okay. So as far as Damien Pierce, yeah, I think this is a thing, Big Al. I think everybody believes that he's working his ass off trying to grasp the offense. I talked to Fred Taylor. He was here interviewing Tank Dell for the Pivot podcast, and that's a really good podcast. They get great interviews out of these guys, so I'm eagerly anticipating the Tank Dell Pivot interview. But I talked to Fred. Fred and I played on the same team for 4 years back in Jacksonville. And, obviously he went to Florida, so he knows Damien Pierce and likes him a lot. And he hadn't watched him yet this year, but I was kind of describing the situation the way I saw it. And Fred just speaking in generalities, because he had not seen Damien play at that point. We just talked about, as a running back especially, it's really hard to go from that point in practice. And he talked about himself where you're really trying to focus in and dial into all of the details, really. And Fred was a super smart running back. He was really good in pass protection. Like, he saw the game differently. Fred was freakishly fast and strong, but he was also really, really smart. And this matches kind of, I think, what I used to see in practice. Very meticulous in practice and just wanted to know all the finer details. But then in the game, you got to get unconscious. You just got to let it go, especially at running back at that position. I think that's the position where you just you hear so many players, running backs, talk about how they can't remember the play afterwards. Like they don't like Barry Sanders doesn't even remember like a first person experience of a lot of his great runs, because they go there. It's all subconscious. It's their damn lizard brain driving them on those things, and just reaction and everything else is taken over. And I think that's where, like, Damien hasn't gotten back to that spot. Like that. Remember the crazy play in Jacksonville where he broke like 6 tackles? There was a play maybe on that same series or just the series before, and it was off to the left, and he broke 1 tackle and then he got wrapped up, but it was almost like you could see where he's just such a sweet kid. But then you could like see in this moment where all of a sudden it just looked like a comic book movie where all of a sudden a beast was released and like something inside of him snapped like a werewolf. And then, a little bit later he has that ridiculously big run. And I think some of it is just that. I think in this offense where there's just a lot more keys, there's a lot more pre-snap that you have to figure out. You're going to change your reads based on the defensive front to a much greater degree than, with more simplified offenses. And I think he's really trying to do the right thing, but then when he's running, he's thinking, and it's enough to notch it down to where, yeah, the blocking's not perfect, but 2022 Damien would have blasted through some of the imperfect blocking. And we're just not seeing that right now. So we'll see. I think Damien and Nick just really, I think they want to, I think they maybe, I don't know what they actually think, but I feel like if what DeMeco said was true and that Damien just needs more opportunities behind good blocking, I think that they're just hoping that with reps that somewhere along the way it's going to click. And I don't know. It's a weird thing because he's not old, and yet it's starting to feel a little Jose Abreu-ish for those of you who aren't Astros fans, the Astros stuck with Jose Abreu this year after it was pretty obvious that he was lost at the plate for a long, long time. Twice, actually. They sent him down to play with rookies, and they were encouraged by what they saw, so they gave him a second opportunity. Hearing all the talk from DeMeco and Caserio and CJ plus Will raising the bar about the Texans football, making this an elite organization. I want to enjoy this season. Things can change real fast in the NFL. Yeah, I think, for the most part, look, we've seen it with the Lions. The Texans are really following a very similar trajectory to the Lions a couple years ago. The Lions got a jump start on them. I think the biggest difference is that the Lions have gotten the most out of Jared Goff, but Jared Goff doesn't have what CJ Stroud has. And I'm not saying that to throw shade at Jared Goff, other than to say he doesn't have the makeup of a top 3 quarterback, where CJ, I think as early as this year, can be a top 3 quarterback. Mentally, his pocket movement in preseason, even though it's vanilla defenses, et cetera, that's one of the things he's worked on, and he's shown that economy of motion in the backfield to where he's just, when he needs to take one step, he takes one step. You contrast that to Anthony Richardson, semi-rookie, and the play he had the other night when he got strip sacked, I mean, he bailed the hell out of that pocket, and I have no idea why. It was 1st and 10. He had the check down wide open in front of him. It would have been an easy 4-yard gain and possibly more if he had made the decision quickly enough. And he turned and bailed because there was a little bit of clutter up in front of him. Like that's where CJ's so far beyond that, and really was early in his career last year, early in his season last year, that that's a big difference. And also like Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Okay, Sarah had an interesting point. Let me see if this is let's see. What's Sarah's interesting point? John, because they're giving him a second chance like they have Pitre, look how great he's been. Okay, right. Okay, thank you, Sarah. I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking about John Mechie, where John Mechie, it's not a second chance necessarily, but they were going to be patient with John Mechie, and all of a sudden it clicked for him. Jalen Pitre, good point. Very good point. Jalen Pitre came with a position change too. I think, if you wanted to be cynical about it, you could say, well, they quit on him as a safety. But I think they looked at his skill set and they realized, all right, there's something better here. And we should have realized this last year maybe, but we're gonna use him in this role this year. And so far, it looks really good. I do have one little reservation about Jalen Pitre and the way they're using him now. I think it's got some limitations in that I like I said before, I think he's more of a hybrid safety / linebacker than he is a safety / corner. So when you're using him as that slot corner, when you're expecting him to sometimes play man versus super speedy slot receivers, I'm skeptical of that. It doesn't mean that they can't continue using him as the nickel backer, but it means that offenses are going to maybe have a little bit better of a bead on what coverages the Texans can play behind him. And he's going to have to be the reason they want him up there on the line at times is so he can blitz, but he's going to have to be really, really detailed in not giving away any tells about his blitzing, all that kind of stuff. And he definitely has the ability to do it, but I need to see it. I need to see it kind of work its way through. But I'm very excited about Jalen Pitre. I think he's made genuine progress in a lot of the fundamentals. Like there's the way they're using him, which is awesome and cool. His tackling is improved, and even if they had never played tackle football, I would have felt comfortable that his tackling had improved by the way he practices. If you watch the game the other night, even on that really easy play in the backfield, he settled down into a good football position before he made the tackle because he didn't really have any support. The running back could have spun out, and then he put his arms out wide and he wrapped up. And then he made a play out in the flat where put his arms out wide, wrapped up, secured the tackle, didn't start going for the football until he was on his way to pushing the guy out of bounds. And then it was Alshire, right, who came in to help finish him off. And then one of the most exciting plays from Pitre's game last week was when he had force. He was supposed to turn the play back in the run. So, he's supposed to take whatever blocker is on him and just attack that dude's outside shoulder and force the running back inside. The guy who was trying to block him was one of the Giants' fattest and biggest starting offensive linemen. and Pitre just unloaded on him. And it ended up being just a stalemate. But, that's a 220-pound guy versus a 340-pound guy. And then he let the offensive lineman know about it. I felt bad for the big fella. Guy's just, he got stoned up by a defensive back. All right, no shade. Had I asked if you had thrown me shade? List me not. What are our working eyes about? I wish I could sort these out by users. No shade, just verifying we have 2 working eyes. I remember asking about that other question that I wasn't sure about, but if you could, honestly, I know it's been a long day. With some of these, could you just add a little bit of punctuation? I know it doesn't seem like a big deal when you're typing it or texting it, but just sometimes a lack of a period or something or a question mark, it makes a really big difference. A really big difference, kids. Okay. All right. I do not understand the logic when you only highlight a guy's negatives before saying we should trade him. So, as far as if what you're talking about is Damien Pierce, here's the logic there is that I think there are a lot of teams that might look at Damien Pierce right now and think, all right, well, look, it's not like he's had a bunch of injuries or anything. I think to a lot of people in their eyes, and I know there are people in the NFL outside of Houston who really like Damien Pierce and are intrigued by his upside. I can tell you that. I think that they look at if he were in our scheme, and maybe, like, in my opinion, I think he needs to gain a little bit of body weight back. I think he's a strength athlete more so than a speed athlete when it comes to the running back position. But I think there are people out there that look at him and think, all right, well, in our system, we could really use him, especially maybe if we already have a couple guys who are different body types as first and second down guys or first and second running backs. So, it's not like he's untradeable just because he's had 7 bad snaps in the preseason. That's where some of, DeMeco talking about how he's hasn't had good blocking and everything, that could work to their benefit if they do think, like, they might themselves think, you know what, the best thing for Damien is to be maybe in a different setting. There's sometimes where you just know, like, you love a player, but it's just not working out. And sometimes guys just genuinely do need a different setting. Kyle Lowry, when he went off to Toronto, a lot of people would think that's a horrible trade. I can't believe they let go of Kyle Lowry. Look what he became. Kyle Lowry was the first one to tell you, no, that was kind of, I needed that. I needed to be in a different environment. It ended up being perfect for me. I wasn't going to be the same guy if I had stayed in Houston. Those were for slightly different reasons. I think Kyle says he just wasn't as mature and he needed that kick in the butt. I think Damien's plenty mature, but it just might not be the scheme that we're looking. Okay, John, nobody's hating Damien, and I don't think you're directing it towards me. Maybe somebody in the comments are. If you're John, I don't know if you have employees or not. If there's an employee that's just not working out for you and you have a discussion with somebody about why you might need to let go of that employee, is that hating on that employee? I mean, it's just a real conversation, like blind loyalty sometimes is the worst form of love. That's how people end up letting their kids be bastards sometimes, because they confuse, making tough decisions and setting aside your personal loyalty for whatever reason. If you care about Damien Pierce, you can have this frank and open conversation. Yeah, we started off talking about Akers. 100%. I think he needs to be that. I think he needs that. Okay, so you're talking to somebody else then. All right, John. Unless you're talking to okay, you guys are having your side conversations. That's fine. I'll stay the hell out of it. All right. Oh, Brooks blew a penetrating number 93 off his feet, 3 yards on his butt block. Yeah, British looked good as a blocker. I didn't go back and I don't know if I noticed I don't know if I watched every time he blocked when he was a fullback. All I know is that I noticed some good work he did as a fullback. So that's impressive. That's interesting. And likewise, like Troy Hairston's another guy that I like Troy Hairston. It's been hard for Troy Hairston because he was a linebacker in college, like linebacker / defensive end. and had to learn how to play fullback his rookie year, then got injured, and now he's still learning the position. But for what the team needs right now, he missed some blocks today. He also missed on either a kickoff or a punt. He would have been the guy that could have turned the play back in at least, and he missed that. He had 4 holding penalties. He had a touchdown, which was cool. I feel like they were trying to get the ball to the running backs a lot today to just maybe see what they have as receivers, and British Brooks got a reception. I know that I like Jawar Jordan as a receiver. I think it's what is he as a whole package that they probably are hoping that he clears waivers and makes it to probably hoping that he makes it to the practice squad. Let's see. DeMeco's response about DP made me think he's gone. You know what? Let's do this. Let's watch. Let's crank up the old DeMeco Ryans press conference, because now I've got some of you in here that have already watched his press conference, and I just can't stand the fact that you know more than I do. Just can't stand it. It eats at me. I'm a jealous lover. First, what I need to do is close a bunch of tabs. Now, I'm going to warn you that we've had internet issues here all week, so let me know if it gets real choppy and unwatchable, because I don't want to subject you guys to that. You know, someday some of these teams, they go ahead and let me bring this up. Any of you guys that have gone to the Texans YouTube will know that sometimes it's an ordeal trying to actually find where the press conference starts. Scrolling. They can't possibly have not had the press conference yet, right? There we go. There's the old Miko. Looks like it might have been on. Okay. All right. Here's DeMeco Ryans press conference. Let me see where you guys are. Hold on a second. I hadn't planned on doing this. I'll chop this up later and give you my favorite responses that he had, in case you just have something more important to do, like watch an Astros game or something. I'm not afraid to send you guys there if you had forgot the game was on right now. My wife just texted me when we started this thing about something cool CJ had done. All right, here we go. Don't look at my tabs, everybody. Okay, here we go.
Didn't play. What went to the decision?
Okay, so he asked. Somebody's going to ask about DeMeco or about Damien Pierce not playing. It sounds like.
You had mentioned last week that you wanted to see more opportunities, and Damien didn't play. What went to the decision not to play him today?
I didn't play Damien because I've seen enough from Damien in practice and everything, so I've had a good look at Damien.
Does that mean he's on the team for sure? Most of the guys that didn't play today, you feel like, okay, they're 100% on the team. I thought that maybe they might be trying to trade him. I think they're genuinely, I don't know. I think they're committed to him. They were committed to him at the beginning of last season too, man. That's the only thing that makes me nervous, is that you're burning daylight in this really tough schedule if you give him 5 or 6 games and it's not working out.
Coach, about 3.5 minutes into the first quarter, I don't know if it was by injury or by you had seen enough from Case. He leads the game, Tim Boyle comes in. Where are you in the thought process of where Case is from a health standpoint, and then your quarterback plan moving forward? Do you use the emergency option for your third quarterback, thinking like that?
Yeah, we have a lot of discussions to make, so we guys ask a lot about the roster and all those things. Those questions will be answered as the week goes on. As you sit here right now today, no decisions has been made on anyone, so we'll see how the roster shakes out.
Yeah, as one of you said, let's see, they were committed to him much longer than just the beginning of last season, right? No, one of you had mentioned that you had watched the press conference. There's a lot of roster questions that he won't answer, but we can use it as a springboard.
We gave Akers a lot of opportunities today. Talk about his performance and how difficult are your decisions going to be at running back and wide receiver.
I don't like how John commands people to talk about how difficult the decision is going to be. Do it! Like he's an angry sling blade.
Hey, Cam has done a really nice job since we got him late there in training camp, but he's stepped in. He's done a really nice job, and everyone sees, like, when he gets the ball in his hands in the games, he's able to make defenders miss, and he's able to continue to press forward and make plays. So exciting, right? And it's tough, right? And it's also, I love that it's tough to make these decisions because that means you have a good football team. And when it's not just set, you still have decisions to make. That's how it should be.
Okay, so Cam Akers, I told you, I was the first to say, yeah, I know. Listen, they signed Cam Akers, but he's coming off a second Achilles tendon. Hey, look, it's an experiment. They signed him for nothing. If you asked me if I knew nothing about the Texans and you had me go out to the game today and say, hey, Seth, pick out the guy that had 2 torn Achilles tendon, would Cam Akers be the last one? He might be the last one. He trucked a dude on the sideline. He had by the way, that second Achilles tendon tear, it was 9 months ago. August, September, October, 9 months ago. And no, he would be the last guy that I thought had his second Achilles tendon tear. Unbelievable.
Coach, a great job running the ball today all together. What have you thought about the reserve offensive lineman today in that game and how they improved from last week's performance?
Just from the sideline watching, I feel like our O-line did a better job of staying attached and finishing blocks today. Always have to go back and watch the film to see, who stood out amongst the group. But I like how they work collectively today to allow us to run the ball.
Yeah, I thought, for one, even some of the cutbacks, Cam had the one where he cut back against the grain again. The nice thing about the play action on those zone runs is that even though it looks like it's poorly blocked, they're selling it well enough and getting everybody running that's where it's dicey sometimes to say the running is good or bad because those lanes are narrow and they open up very quickly. And sometimes it'll look like when you go back and watch it in freeze frame, you think, well, yeah, there was a linebacker right there. You have to realize that, yeah, that linebacker, it was going to take him 3 steps to stop his momentum moving to the side. I thought that Jawar Jordan, to my memory, had a really nice run where he found the lane, one cut, and got upfield quickly on a zone run. Cam Akers has done it a few times. Cam looks just very smooth. Cam was a very good fit for the Rams when they ran a lot of outside zone. They moved away from that, and that was one of the reasons that they didn't really see Cam as a fit there, aside from also he just wasn't the same after that first Achilles. Turns out the trick is tearing both of them, apparently. It's weird. That's why I say Damien in some ways I think is a better fit for the current Rams because they're a lot more gap scheme. And Cam Akers now is a better fit for the Texans offense than he is for the current Rams offense.
Has Marcus Harris been at all? Has Marcus Harris been at all a surprise or I don't want to say revelation, but or somebody who has played well throughout the preseason for you?
So Marcus Harris, Texans draft pick, undersized, but my God, this is how I know I've been out of the league for a long time. I see him and Feldarius Payne, who are supposedly undersized, and they're still built like brick bleep houses, he's a thick dude. And I think he's gotten better. He's a shorter, lighter by defensive tackle standards guys. I think he's gotten better at taking on double teams and standing up and staying stout, but he is penetrating into the backfield a lot. And today I was kind of surprised that he only had 2 tackles credited. And then I realized okay, a lot of those plays, he's the guy that penetrates and turns the ball back to a linebacker and is around the tackle. But I think he's one of those guys that a veteran player might get pushed out because they've got a lot of big guys right now. If you look at really Khalil, Heinisch, and Tim Settle, those are like 3 big body veteran defensive tackles. And I think one of those guys will get replaced by Marcus Harris. And I think it'll probably right now Tim Settle hasn't even really seen the field much. He's been banged up a lot. So maybe it's Tim Settle.
Marcus has definitely grown throughout OTAs, throughout the preseason. He's grown. He's gotten better. And that's what, preseason, that's what training camp is about. Young players like Marcus getting the opportunity to get reps, valuable reps, get in the game, and actually showcase that, hey, I have gotten better. I have improved, and he's continuing to ascend. So he had a really nice, productive day today. He was disruptive playing on their side of the line of scrimmage. So I'd like to see where Marcus is headed.
Yeah, a lot of those guys. Malik Fisher made some nice plays today. We've seen Solomon Byrd flash. Solomon's an interesting one because I think Solomon's got polish, and he's an older guy. If I remember correctly, he's like 25, married with 2 kids, super mature. But I wonder how much upside they feel there is with him, where I think Malik Fisher and Ali Gay. Ali Gay doesn't flash athletically. He's just so long, and he's really learned to use his arms well and use all that length well.
Evaluation of the linebackers' performance today.
I thought the linebackers did a nice job of tackling. All right, the guys stepped up, they tackled well, and they had a lot of chances to defend the run, to see, guys step up and make plays in the run game. So that's where I see it. Again, you go back, evaluate the film to see where we were in the passing game.
DeMeco, you want to run the ball back.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say about the linebackers was Neville Hewitt was out there, I think still in the fourth quarter. I feel bad that I feel like Neville Hewitt could have been all-pro in the year 1997 because he's an old-school looking linebacker. He doesn't run that fast, but he just brings the wood. And his value on special teams is really big. So I'd be surprised if he doesn't make the team. And I think Jake Hansen makes the team too.
Better than last year because you guys driving so many talented receivers. How do you find that right balance when your passing game has a chance to be great?
That's a great question, John. I think for us, and how do you find balance? I think it'll be week by week, depending on who has the hot hand. If that defense that week dictates that we throw the ball more, then we'll rely on throwing the football because we feel like we have a good core group at their receivers and tight end to be able to throw the ball around. And when we need to run it, whenever it calls for that, feel like we have, Joe can do a great job of running the ball for as well. So I think it just weekly, it'll change depending on who we're facing and where we feel like our strengths are needed for that particular week.
I don't know if the question was about the roster itself or on just distributing the ball. Yeah, I promise you, offensive coaches don't sit around having debates about who's WR1 and who's WR2. It's like, how do these guys fit in this week and where are our best opportunities? And then off to the races you go.
Coach, I was just wondering, in the red zone, there have been problems getting into the red zone. And this year, this week, it looked like it was a little bit better progress. What is your summary on getting in the red zone prior to the other preseason games?
Yeah, getting in the red zone, it's all about executing offensively. Didn't like the miscues, just still pre-snap things, formation, getting the line. We can clean up some things there, but it's just staying on schedule. All right, you stay on schedule, get in the red zone, you have opportunity to put points on the board. So I think we did a good job of that today.
Coach, in the return game, obviously Dez must have punt right off the rip there, and we don't see him come back in. Your confidence in Dez being the punt return moving forward, or is that an area you're still deciding and considering with the rest of the staff?
I said, so I don't know if you could hear that. We referenced Dez King dropping the muffing that punt early on. And then he said he didn't come back in, I guess, as a returner because he was definitely out there on defense.
Everything, nothing is said. Like I said earlier, nothing is said on who punt return or who. Like, we have a lot of decisions to be made. We'll see where we end up. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Coach. All right, I've got John Ryan. John, I don't know which conversations you're having right now, but I'm enjoying. Where are you, John? You're a loyal man. You are loyal. I don't think there's a current guy on the team who was on the team last that you'd be in favor of cutting. I like Evan Woods there. I think I like Evan Woods there as a veteran, dependable presence. One of those top three guys are going to get injured at some point, and you have Xavier Hutchinson and or John Mechie. I'm believing now more than ever that it might be both those guys on the roster. But I think Robert Woods is safe. I do wonder if some teams out there might be in the same position the Texans were in last year, where they look at Robert Woods as, hey, boy, we'd sure love to have a veteran receiver who's still got something and can always be in the right spot. Remember those first two games last year, Robert Woods was a safety blanket for CJ in a lot of ways. And CJ could just gun it to Robert Woods like 3 centimeters past the sticks. He'd get 0 yards after catch, but it would be a first down. And he's got that veteran savvy to him. So I don't think they'll let go of Woods. But I'm not going to be surprised. I don't know exactly how they're looking at the roster building. All right, biggest player. Who would be the biggest surprise getting released? Like within reason. Okay, I'll go with the veteran guys. These are my candidates. and this is where I go a little bit like John Ryan, I think, where my sentimentality is getting to me. Let's look at Robert Woods, Jerry Hughes, guys that have been on the team for a while or getting long in the tooth. Case Keenum. These are not my favorites yet for as far as who might get cut as a surprise cut or would be a surprise. I won't be surprised if any of those guys are cut. I think with Case, it would be that he'd still be making a really healthy salary on the practice squad, and he could be the game day emergency quarterback. So that wouldn't be an incredible surprise. Is there a younger player? I've heard people say this. I don't agree with this at all, by the way. But people that I respect. So I'm trying to think about it. And maybe I'm out of whack here. You guys can tell me if I'm the crazy one or not. I've heard people suggest that Blake Fisher is closer to taking Titus Howard's job than people realize. And I don't believe that at all for a couple of reasons. One is I don't think Blake Fisher is ready yet. I think he can be very soon. I think he's made a lot of progress. I think he's just fine athletically. I think his football sense and everything else looks good. He just needs time. He needs reps. I think maybe he needs to put on a little bit of his grown man body weight and strength. But I just don't look at him as there just yet. And I also think that I still think there's like this residual memory of Titus Howard and how he played as a guard, and people thinking that that's exactly how he plays at tackle. And it's not true. So I think Titus, I don't think Titus is anywhere near being replaced, or that there's any chance that somehow they're going to, trade away Titus Howard or something. So that would be a big surprise. So I guess because people have said it, and I try not to be an arrogant jerk that just, doesn't realize that he's wrong sometimes. It helps that I'm wrong a lot, so I have it thrown in my face. But that would be the biggest surprise. If that is indeed even a possibility, that would really surprise me. Is Skoranek worth keeping? I mean, I think he's worth keeping, but I don't think whatever he adds on special teams or as a, because he's not a fullback. They would use him as a fullback in special situations with the Rams, but that was really only for like one stretch of 3 weeks a couple of years ago. And I think there's a reason I think that he's not on the Rams anymore. So I mean, he might have, for his sake, he probably wishes he'd gotten traded to a different team than the Texans, just because the Texans are so deep at wide receiver. I think there's plenty of other teams, and I think Skoranek he's a veteran, so if they cut him, he can sign wherever else. I think he probably ends up on a roster somewhere. I can throw out that take about Titus Howard. Okay. I haven't scanned everybody to see if anybody thinks that's a good take or something. I know how I can win John Ryan's support. And it's basically by undying loyalty to anybody who is on the team ever. If you're a Coug, I'm not going to be surprised, man. Let's see. Mechie. Okay, so Mechie. Is Mechie, at this point, because a couple of weeks ago, it wouldn't have been a surprise if Mechie got cut. But if you look at it through the filter of John Mechie, who's looked really good the last couple of weeks and was fighting cancer for 2 years. Like, if I'm the GM, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, man, I've seen a lot of growth in 2 weeks. I saw a physical improvement in the way he's moving and everything else just from last season to this season. And I think if I'm a GM, I'm looking at it through the lens of you always want to be getting younger whenever possible. It's also nice to get cheaper, even though the Texans aren't really cutting a lot of corners financially these days. This year, they pretty much went whole hog all in on it. But the general, they've got a lot of older guys on this team. And in Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie, you've got younger guys that can produce and still have upside, I think. So right now, it's going to be a surprise to me if John Mechie's not on the team. Noah Brown wouldn't be a surprise to me. It's if Noah, and part of it is because Noah Brown, it makes it a little easier because Noah Brown's been banged up a lot. So the question mark about that makes it simpler in my mind, at least. I don't know about how Nick Caserio is feeling it. Yeah, there really is. I'll tell you what, David, this year, there really are a lot of there's so many variables. And some of it, I think was this what Nick was talking about on Pat McAfee? Pat McAfee had Nick Caserio on a couple days ago. before he went off to Ireland, he got drunk as hell on air yesterday. I haven't seen any of that. But I've heard about it. And I've seen that a lot of people were, this is the thing about Pat McAfee. A lot of people were claiming double standard because Pat McAfee didn't get fired for that when other people do this or that. McAfee's not an ESPN employee. McAfee still owns his show. It's just ESPN's got the right to show it on their TV now. And because of that, I think he tries to be a good business partner and everything, but he also, I don't think he has to go to the same HR meetings and everything. So, or is bound by the same standards, which is, again, I don't know if that's great for morale amongst ESPN employees. I'm guessing there's probably a lot of ESPN employees who are like, oh, so I can just show up drunk now. I don't, probably not. You're an employee. It's the price you pay for being an employee. I think next year, one of our first 2 picks will be another swing type tackle. Left tackle and Titus both ticking major knee injury time bombs. They do get injured. You don't feel rock solid about their prospects of staying healthy. I mean, that was I wish Titus hadn't said it. And when in his first press conference during camp, he said that's one of his goals this year to, for the first time, play all 17 games. I was like, oh man, come on. I don't want to be thinking about that now. Come on. I got these little fantasies built up in my brain. I look at the roster, and this is the way it's going to be all year long. Christian Harris is going to be just fine. It's going to be just fine. Christian Harris got to get back, man. It's a different defense with Christian Harris there. I don't know. Like at this point, I don't know. They don't have to release any injury reports until, I don't think they don't have to start until that first week. So we just don't know about Christian Harris. The Texans normally carry 3 or 4 tight ends. It varies. I think there have been times where they've had 4, but usually 3 is the standard for most teams. It's kind of, if you're only carrying 2, it feels, because of injuries and everything, it feels kind of dicey. So and I think tight end's pretty set. It's going to be Dalton Schultz, Brevin Jordan, and Cade Stover. And they've been, they've had Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover both play fullback. Brevin had that holding penalty. Cade, I'd say it was a mixed bag. It's something you can do as a way to mix things up, but I don't think they're going to take the place of my new favorite fullback, British Brooks. Let's see. 2 years ago, got to head off to work. Great stream as always. Thank you, man. Like, subscribe, etc., etc. I can feel the energy starting to wane by myself, not by like. Ideally, honestly, the numbers of people watching keeps growing. I should keep going like a cackling moron, like a buffoon, just more so than typically. But I gotta go watch the Texans highlights. I'll do a highlight reaction reel. I enjoy doing those, and I think for those of you that enjoy my brand of humor, it's my most fun thing that I do, because I can sprinkle in a little bit of analysis, but mostly just my feelings about whatever comes off of my weird, stupid brain. So whenever I do the highlight reactions, please check them out. I try to keep them less than 10 minutes, and I do them for other teams too, but it's a lot more fun with the Texans because I actually know a little bit more what I'm talking about. Do I think Brooks can actually make the squad? They didn't try him at fullback today for no reason, right? They didn't try it for no reason. They also didn't throw him a pass for no reason. So I think today they rolled the running backs up into the shop and plugged in the old diagnostic cable. And they gave Cam Akers more carries than I thought they would for a guy with his injury history. They threw the ball to, let's look at the running backs before I go. I promise you, I'll let you guys go in a little bit, but for now, hang out with me for a second. So as far as receiving, wow, there are a lot of them. Here are the running backs who caught footballs. Cam Akers, Troy Hairston, J.J. Taylor, Jawar Jordan, British Brooks, Nick Bawden. Yeah, that's a trend right there. I think they were very much trying to get a feel for, like, all right, can we see this guy as a receiver? Can we actually use him as a receiver? Especially for fullbacks. It's like most teams that use a fullback these days, it is not your Vontae Leach. It's a guy that they feel good about as a receiver. And I know Vontae had some receptions, but they'd ideally like you to be not necessarily a threat, but at the very least somebody that has to be accounted for as a receiver. And British Brooks, is it just me, or has he looked way more spry and athletic than I thought he was? I always just kind of pictured him as, going back to college, just like, hey, he's this big dude that comes in and gets you 3 or 4 yards, right? Yeah, boy, I don't know. He gets out in space and he's got some Okoye to him. So anyway, please like, subscribe, and I'll compress some of Nico's press conferences and everybody else for later in a more consumable form. Appreciate it, everybody.